So, anything?
Um, I have a question about while you're practicing meditation.
Okay.
And the question is, I had one teacher once say that after you've set yourself up in the proper position and everything, your focus should be so much on your meditation that if you start slumping or your hands open, or you shouldn't change it. You should just stay there. Then I have other teachers that have said, you want to get your posture, but if you catch that you're, not losing your posture, just adjust yourself and just continue. So I wondered how you feel about these two different approaches.
I don't have a strong feeling. Sorry.
Okay, so it's either acceptable, I mean, either ways you've
Sounds
seen
acceptable
people
to me.
meditate.
If they're both taught by valid, credible teachers, then don't. If you could doubt the teacher, then don't follow the instructions.
I'm sure that
Which do you do?
So I would try to straighten my posture, but that's partly because it has a noticeable impact on the clarity of my mind for me. If I'm slouching, then it's not just that my body changes, but my mind gets duller too. Since I know, pretty much invariably, if I'm aware I'm slouched or something and I straighten up, all of a sudden the clarity of the mind perks up too. So that's for me that works better. I think if you're really, have deep concentration where, at some point the concentration gets so deep that the sense consciousnesses actually basically shut off, right? Or they're blocked, right? And so, like, as if we're asleep, right? Where the mental consciousness is still active, but not the sense consciousnesses. So, at that point, then what can you do? I mean, your body's just gonna do what it does, and you're meditating, and you won't even be aware of it.
Do if you reach a level of concentration where your sensory awareness kind of shuts down, then how can you be focused on the breath? How can the breath be the focus of concentration?
The breath also stops at some point, so
right.
that wouldn't be. So yeah, during the fourth jhana, the breath actually stops because that's considered there are 8 kind of flaws of meditation that are stopped during the fourth jhana. So even the breath is one of them.
So is it the case that
so that wouldn't be an object of them?
Okay, so is it the case that having the breath be the object of meditation isn't something that can take you all the way? You have to change your
it could take you to shamatha, yeah.
Shamatha, but not to
the fourth jhana. Yeah, not to. I mean, and then in the after the fourth jhana, it's the formless realm jhanas, right? So then there's no form appearing to the mind whatsoever. Including breath is considered form, meaning any physical object or material thing, anything material matter. But I would say that there's probably still a subtle breath, like a prana, that could probably become a focal object. Sure. Honestly, I'm not sure. That's more getting into like tantric explanation, so I don't. Okay, Jason.
I have a question about sort of breathing styles or breathing techniques, right? And this difference between like mere attention to the breathing and controlled breathing.
Okay.
And whether one should aim to have a deeper or a fuller breath in meditation rather than say just notice it but let it be a shallow breath. And
so where is that question coming from?
The question is coming from like my own experience
okay.
in meditation is that I find far more discursiveness, far more trouble just focusing on the breath when it's shallow than when I'm actually really focusing on having this fullness of breath and breathing
Right.
all the way.
Pranayama, like they do in yoga practice, maybe.
Yeah, precisely.
Yeah.
Kind of doing a full filling and exhaling all the way in and out,
Well,
and kind of nice and slow.
right.
And maybe not one that requires any extra effort,
Mm,
you know, or maybe just a little bit, but it's
Mhm.
more about that it is a controlled
mhm.
procedure, just like I might have to actually stabilize the body and like
Yeah.
have an erect posture.
I would say that probably
Mm.
it would be very helpful to do a controlled full inhalation, exhalation for a period of time, say a count of 21 breaths, or maybe the first 5 minutes of your session. And then if you can, to after your mind really does becomes somewhat calmer, and that you really feel like, okay, now your concentration is kind of built up to a point, then to try and let that specific intention to have a certain kind of breathing, let that fade, let that go. And then see if you can just take that attention, that concentration that's now present, and just keep it with the natural flow of the breath. And also, if you do yoga or pranayama, different types of breathing exercises, then over time, your your lungs will, I mean, their natural breath pattern will become deeper and maybe more satisfying and more easier to concentrate on,
Yeah.
So that's how I would look at that. I think this honestly isn't something I don't think I've actually heard much of an explanation on, but my take is, my understanding is that if you try and control or modify the breath, then that, just like you're saying, like you're making an effort, right? I mean, but not just an effort, but like that specific intention is now becoming part of what your mind is focused on, right? So now you're sort of adding a distraction in a way by saying, okay, no, keep the exhalation long, no, inhale long. Now, so you're like, there's that kind of a little bit of mental chatter that's now accompanying, so that mental chatter could be itself become a distraction. Now, again, probably not at the first, beginning stages, right? It's like at this point, we just need whatever technique is going to get our mind to calm down, one level from the craziness that we're at now, then that's good. Yeah. But I think it's like with the kind of long-term aim in sight that it's advised to not do that.
Yeah, that's really helpful.
Does that get you out there? I'm not sure who iPhone is. Maybe not. Anyway, I'm sure he would turn on his video if it was. Okay. Yes, Carrie.
I have a question, but I think it may be premature.
Okay.
I am interested in knowing more about analytical meditation. Again, I'm not sure we've gotten to that yet, so maybe my question is.
Well, analytical meditation was most of the first and second volume of this text, right? So we if we were going in order, we would have been doing lots of analytical meditation.
I know that I hear it come up in as we're practicing. It's like you're understanding, and again, this may not be the time for that. Be interested in.
Well, I'll say one thing is, I don't know if you saw them. Was it sent out in Facebook or I think in the WhatsApp chat, the Forest of Learning? There is a series of teachings by Kandola, one of my teachers. She's a really excellent alama from Tibet, of course. Anyway, she's teaching on analytical meditation at the end of the month at Garrison Institute, but it's streamed also. So it's streamed and it's completely free of charge. You can watch the streaming teaching live. And I think it's from the 31st through May something, or the 27th through May 1st, or something like this. It's coming up very soon. So maybe check that out if you have time or anything. But just to maybe I'll just inquire a little more if that's okay. So if you're doing a meditation on, so have you ever meditated on impermanence?
Um,
Okay. Now, if you were to, how would that be an analytical meditation or a stabilizing meditation?
I feel like it would need to be difficult.
Good. Yeah, it would start at least that way. Yeah.
So my sense is that it's more like questioning.
Right.
But I guess that what I didn't know is there a specific format or
I see.
do you just, are there specific questions you
Yeah.
ask to sort of get yourself into?
Yeah. Very right. Very good question. Yeah. So it really is this, and this is one of the reasons your question really points to one of the reasons why study is so valuable. Because when you read, so what you do with analytical meditation on impermanence is you read the section of the Lamrim channel on impermanence. I mean, if you're doing like the really hyper philosophy debate, that where everything is debated and you're analyzing every word of a text with another person and trying to find a logical flaw in the other person's position, that itself becomes an analytical meditation, that practice of debate. But without that, you just read the textbook, the book. And when you read the book, what happens is, well, you're processing the information, you're processing what's talked about there. So Tsongkhapa, let's open it up and see what he says first, just for a moment. So that's volume 1. Wait, let me go find the page so I can jump right there. Okay, page number Mindfulness of Death 143. Now, just so you know, there are 2 types of impermanence. The coarse impermanence, which means death or something just breaking or ceasing to exist. And subtle impermanence is actually momentary change, right? So they're both there. This one's more about the coarse impermanence of death. Okay, so let's just go and see what he says. Okay, so first he's talking about the faults of not cultivating mindfulness of death. So let's just read this page together. And this will be an illustration of how we do analytical meditation. Would someone like to read? Am I doing a screen share still? Let me make sure I'm doing the screen share for those who are on Zoom. I don't think I am.
No, you're not.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so would anyone like to start reading? Let's start with the first paragraph here.
Sure.
Okay, thank you, Jason.
1, the faults of not cultivating mindfulness of death. As previously mentioned, there are 4 errors that impede you or taking full advantage of your life. Conceiving 1, the impure to be pure, 2, suffering to be happiness, 3, the impermanent to be permanent, and 4, the selfless to have a self. Initially, it is merely the conception of the impermanent to be permanent that is the avenue of much injury. This conception is twofold, coarse and subtle. Of these 2, in the case of your coarse impermanence, which is your death, the avenue of injury is the very thought, I will not die. Everyone has the idea that death will come later, at the end. However, with each passing day, people think, I will not die today. I will not die today. Clinging to this thought until the moment of death. If you are obstructed by such an attitude and do not bring its remedy to mind, you will continue to think that you will remain in this life.
Yeah, you can read one more sentence or 2.
Sure. Then, as long as you have this attitude, you will continually think only of how to achieve happiness and evade suffering in this life alone, thinking, I need this and that. You will not engage in rigor in religious practice because you do not think about things of great importance, such as future lives, liberation, and omniscience. Although you may perchance engage in study, reflection, meditation, and so forth, it will only be for the sake of this life, and whatever virtue you create will be of meager strength. Moreover, since your practice will be involved with wrongdoing, sins, and infractions, it will be rare for these virtuous activities not to be mixed with causes of miserable rebirths. Even if you try to engage in practices directed towards future lives, you will not be able to prevent the laziness of procrastination, thinking, I will do it eventually. By passing time in distractions such as sleep, lethargy, senseless talk, in eating and drinking, you will not attain proper achievement, which comes through great effort.
Okay. Good. So what that's doing is giving us information, knowledge, teaching about the problem that will come to us or that does come to us because we don't think about our own death and acknowledge it. So when you read that, so there are 3 levels of learning, right? 3 degrees of learning. The learning that simply comes from an external source, received knowledge. That's when we read, when a teacher says something to us or a friend, anyone. So we hear this or read this and go, oh, yeah, it makes sense. Like, I do constantly think I'm not going to die today. When I really think about it, yeah, and that does cause me to not consider future lives, liberation, and omniscience. Instead, I'm thinking about, my, get filing that insurance claim and having to, go meet this person, that person, and get, a raise or get a, advance in my career, or all these things, right? Meet that new, boyfriend, girlfriend, spouse, get a new house, fix the old house. Okay. Those are all what? Worldly things, right? Those are all things of this life. Another word. So you consider, oh yeah, that's received knowledge, right? The next level is then the knowledge that's actually integrate or internalize. So how do you internalize that? Well, then you do analytical meditation. So you take that sort of, oh yeah, it makes sense that I've heard this, and then you just think about it more deeply. So whatever that means to you. So sometimes it's helpful to actually like read a text and then like take the quote from that text into your mind and say, I mean, here it's just prose, so that's one of the nice things about the verse text is that they're kind of pithy, right? They're easy to just hold a line or a verse in mind. But you can just read the sentence. Of these two, in the case of your course impermanence, which is your death, the avenue of injury is the very thought, I will not die. Everyone has the idea that death will come later, at the end. However, with each passing day, people think, I will not die today, I will not die today, clinging to this thought until the moment of death. If you are obstructed by such an attitude and do not bring its remedy to mind, you will continue to think that you remain in this life. So just like you have the basic understanding of what that means, now make it deeper. So think about, what does it really mean to cling to this thought, I will not die today, right? Try and feel it, right? Feel what it feels like to have the misconception that I will not die today. I mean, not that it's certain that we will die today, but there's no guarantee that we won't, right? But we feel like we're guaranteed not to, right? So identify that feeling in yourself. Start to consider, is it right? Is it possible I will die today? What are the different conditions that could cause me to die today? What are the conditions that are needed for me to not die today? How many are there? How many conditions, right, are needed to keep me alive? They could all transform possibly into a condition that kills me, right? I need a roof over my head. I need the car, my food to live. Each one of those things could actually become the cause of my death today. The roof could collapse, an earthquake or something, right? Could get in a car accident. Food could have could have salmonella, some bacteria. It could die from any of those things. So think about those things and then see how it changes the way you feel. See if that conception, I will not die today, first you've identified it, see if it starts to weaken, shift, change. Start to feel like, oh, could die today. See if there's a change in your feeling. So that's all analytical meditation on death or impermanence, the impermanence of death, of course, impermanence.
I think I do that in my journal a lot. I feel like I do that in journaling.
Very good.
So it would be just not doing the writing and sitting with it.
Yeah, allowing it to really permeate kind of into it creates a real like an epiphany, like a feeling in you. Yeah. Yeah.
What you're describing, study, contemplation, and meditation.
Yeah. Right. So the third level then, so I talked about received knowledge, which is sometimes called the wisdom of hearing, and then the internalized knowledge, that's the wisdom sometimes called the wisdom of contemplation. Then the next stage is then the real knowledge that comes from training, the final stage of learning, where you have had the epiphany, you really understand, but now you just need to focus. That's where you bring shamatha. So now you just literally focus single pointedly, and that's called the wisdom of meditation. And you focus single pointedly to the point where it really has a profound transformation in your whole way of perceiving the world, because that's just how the mind works. It changes when you change your focus. Yeah. Yeah, so the classic way of talking about that is hearing, thinking, and reflection in terms of like it's a direct translation from the Tibetan. But there's other nice ways of talking about it that are helpful too.
So is it typical as you develop your meditation practice that when you are doing it, you're doing both single pointed and analytical?
Right. So we just talked about this last week, which is a great place to maybe start with the text. Does anybody remember what I'm talking about? Can anybody remember in what way did we talk about this last week?
The universal one.
So the objects of meditation, good, the focal objects of meditation. Oh, I'm in the wrong, where am I? I'm in the wrong book. Volume, we have to go back to volume 3. Here it is. Okay, we're doing screen share. No, that's off again. Okay, turn that on. Okay. So we are in the identifying the focal objects of meditation, right? Go down a bit.
What page is that? What song?
I'm not there yet. What to do while focusing on an object of meditation. As 2, identifying the object of meditation upon which your attention is set, and how to focus your mind on the object of meditation. So this is now starting on page 35. Okay, so the object of meditation, right? The Bhagavan stated that yogis have 4 types of objects of meditation: universal objects, objects for purifying your behavior, objects of expertise, and objects of meditation for purifying afflictions. Okay, so Neil, you pointed out, well, we only went through the first one, and that has 4. Now, remember, so this is a little bit of a mistranslation, okay, because in Tibetan, it just says, it literally just says, within universal object of meditation, there are 4, right? What it's actually saying is there are 4 subtopics within that heading. It's not saying there are 4 types. That's why I realized the question last week came from just honestly, I think it's one of the places where I have to just say it's a little bit of a mistranslation, but because again, it's not saying like these are each distinct different objects, right? It's saying this is the heading, the universal objects of meditation. These are 4 subtopics or ways of talking about it. It just means that there are 4 other things within this outline. That's why you have to understand the whole way outlines are used in Tibetan text, and it takes some getting used to, and it's obviously a little harder in English translation, but it's just something to be aware of, that sometimes when something's a little confusing or off in the structure of a text, it's just because, I mean, we'll just chalk it up to something's lost in translation. But let's 1 second, let's just like point out. So where did it talk about this? Carrie's question again of kind of using both, right, analytical and stabilizing meditation. So that's in this first part, right, where it talks about the 2 types of images, discursive and non-discursive, are posited in terms of the observer. The first is the object of insight, and the second is the object of meditative serenity. Again, insight is just the sort of another word for, or really if you're defining it technically, the advanced form of analytical meditation. Meditative serenity is the advanced form of stabilizing meditation. Okay, so what does it say? When you carry out the analysis while observing an object, then the image is discursive, since analytical thinking is present. When you stabilize your mind without analysis while observing an object, the image is said to be non-discursive, since analytical thinking is absent. Okay, so again, that means you start, like Ashila explained, if you're thinking about impermanence, you start with analytical meditation, reflecting on it in your life, right? Thinking of death. How many people do I know have died? I have a friend. He was the first Westerner ever to join my monastery. He was the first, I think, maybe second Westerner ever to get to become Geshe. He passed away yesterday. And how many other people do we all know that have passed away? When I was a child, I knew people that passed away, neighbors, kids down the street. I knew, my, great grandparents, then my grandparents, then right, and you hear about friends, the suicides, the drug overdoses, the car accidents, the ATV accidents, right? You hear about all these things as you go each year. You hear about people dying, right? So that's part of analytical meditation. Okay. Then when you really feel like it's like, okay, you have like a strong, understanding. I mean, understanding is hard to say what it is, right? But it's something you experience internally. Okay, I get it. Then you allow your full attention just to focus on that understanding, right? I mean that what it is you've understood, right? Okay. Everybody dies. There's no escaping it. Focus your mind on that, the definitive nature of death. Single point of view. Then you're combining, right? You're doing analytical meditation, then taking serenity or stabilizing to focus on what you've understood.
I have a question. So as a beginning meditator,
Yeah, this is all for beginning meditators. Yeah.
those single points on meditating on so many people I know that have died. I mean, how do you not ask questions to yourself?
So you switch back and forth. That's what I'm saying. You first do the analytical meditation, then there's a sense of it. You understand more than just saying like, oh yeah, people die, but you feel it. Okay. You feel that death is certain. Then you focus on that certainty of death. That's deepening, that's giving you a chance to really let your basic way of thinking now start to absorb this new way of thinking, right? Your basic meaning, your standard typical way of thinking has, like Tsongkhapa points out, from day one, always been thinking, I'm not gonna die today, I'm not gonna die today, So now we're letting a new thought, really, your mind is really absorbing the power of this new thought. Oh, I will die, I will die, I will die, right? But you have to first analyze to, analyze maybe isn't even the right word, but you have to develop an awareness of it through contemplation, thinking, studying, reading different words that impact you. and then thinking about your actual we have this all it comes down to it meaning any development of deeper understanding and insight in Buddhist practice all comes down to relying on just our empirical observations, right? You have to actually use the stuff of our lived experience, right? Does that make sense? So then when you say, how does a question not arise? If a question arises, then you have to decide, okay, either I'm like, maybe you make a time frame, say, okay, now I'm going to just do 5 minutes of stabilizing meditation. And then if a question arises, then you say, okay, I'll come to it later. I'm doing stabilizing meditation now. Then after you can start analyzing again, right? Or do a 1 minute of stabilizing and start analyzing again. You just want to don't get too loose with your meditation.
You meditate on the single point in meditation and impermanence. Do you meditate on the feeling, or do you meditate on the actual language and thought?
So you decide if there's a difference. Tell me, is there a difference?
I believe there is at least.
When you're having the language, when the language and thought is percolating in your mind, is there a feeling there or not?
Sometimes there is, and sometimes.
Okay, so meditate on the times when there is.
Yeah, it's actually going to be my question statement is that, you might be meditating on that feeling or emotion arises. Then do you focus on that? Like, would I say, so why am I feeling that?
Sure.
And start.
It takes some time to really get clear about what it is that's happening in your mind, right? So when you just say a feeling arises, like it could be fear, right? It could be like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna die. Like, no, like, so that's not necessarily the awareness of death, right? Now it could just be fear of death, right? That's a little different. But then you're right. So you ask yourself, exactly right. Ask yourself, that's the first thing you should do. What is this feeling? Try and distinguish. Is this just an awareness of death? Or is it a fear of dying? Try to distinguish. Yeah. But at the same time, I should say, like, if you have an awareness of death, especially newly developed, in opposition to the basic stance that we've had for our whole lives, there probably will be some fear, right? So it doesn't mean that, like, fear, I'm not saying, like, don't keep meditating on it if you have fear. That's okay too, but just exactly what you're saying. Try to understand it first. Yeah. And then if you feel like, okay, I'm ready to keep focusing on this, even though there's some fear, then keep focusing on it. If it's too much, if it, you don't want to trigger yourself, right? Do things that are somehow traumatizing or overwhelming. Yeah. But, sometimes spiritual practice the point is to change our mind. So it's gonna something's gonna happen. Yes.
So let me know if this is correct, if this is the distinction between analytical meditation and single point meditation is that analytical meditation goes between a bunch of objects, right? So in this sense, like when you're meditating, when you're doing an analytical meditation on impermanence, then actually it is expected that you're going to think about, how you're born, and there are these causes and conditions for your arising, and then these things that sustain you, but ultimately these things that sustain you, like their conditions are going to go away, and then you're going to die, right? And this is the case and you can go through that sequence of arising and ceasing for all phenomenon, and if you're approaching death in that way, then the what makes it analytical is the moving between a whole series of objects.
Yeah, related objects though.
Right.
It's not just like, oh yes, all phenomena arise and then all conditioned created phenomena arise and then cease, and then all of a sudden jump to all sentient beings have that.
Right.
Yeah.
So precisely. So and the fear.
But I would say that the stabilizing meditation, in a sense, is the same. It's just that what happens is you basically build up a more detailed construct of impermanence by doing the analytical meditation, right? So once you have that more detailed construct, I mean, yes, you would just label it death. This is my understanding of death, but it's very it's filled out by everything you just said, right?
Yeah.
And so then when if you single pointedly focus on that, it's different than just focusing on the thought, I'm going to die, I'm going to, it's
Right.
not so dull, it's not
Yeah.
so simple.
Right. So is what's single about it is it that you see it's like togetherness, if you will, like you see death as this kind of process. You can see it at once,
I think so.
maybe.
I mean, I'm not entirely sure what you mean by that, but I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
what you're saying is how I would understand it. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's the same as like how you described, like if you're meditating on the image of Buddha.
Yeah.
At first, you kind of have to go through like the arm. This is what his arm looks like. This is what his head looks like. This is what his leg. But then eventually, you can put it all together and kind of single pointedly see the whole image.
Right. I mean, just like with your eyes, like we see the whole image, but then if we really think about it, like, oh well, it's because I'm seeing the head and the arm, and the torso, and the legs, and the robes, and the Ushnisha, the bowl, the mudra. It's like you have to, you know. So, yeah. And then when you're building it up in your mind, of course, you can just have the flash of. I mean, if you just look at the Buddha image and then close your eyes the next moment, you can have a relatively decent memory just from the power of having just seen it, of what the image is. But to really stabilize it clearly, then right, you want to go and fill it in. Okay, the head was like that shape, that color, the eyes were like that, the right hand and the left hand. And then, okay, now put it together. Yeah, so it is very similar. Yeah, it's just analytical meditation it does require more learning, right? That first step is not to be dismissed, right? Not to be underestimated. The first step of the three parts we talked about, which is the received knowledge, the wisdom of hearing or study. Yeah, I mean, it really is the Buddhist tradition sort of, forte is learning. Yeah, because there's just so much. I mean, why do we have to do that? Because we have so much misconception in our mind, right? We have so many garbage ideas. Garbage, not just ideas, but thoughts, garbage thoughts, right? So, to learn a lot, to be able to really, strike at those, to really get to a point where we can see clearly that they are garbage. They're wrong. They're wrong, right?
So somebody, like, let's say someone's experiencing anxiety, attempting to do some analytical meditation might lead them to a better understanding to maybe relieve that, or
Of course. I mean, it depends on. So, I recently attended a workshop on CBCT, which is cognitively based compassion training, and this is a program developed by Geshe from the Institute of Buddhist Dialectics in Dharamsala, who's now professor at Emory University. So since he actually developed this as a protocol to use in his research during his PhD, and so it's been around for about 20 years already, and it's part of this training helped me to see that, yeah, it's really what we're doing is essentially, have you heard about cognitive therapy? Is that familiar to you? Yeah, it's essentially cognitive therapy. We're just doing it, we're learning how to apply it to ourselves, right? And I mean, honestly, even Lama Yeshe, who is a great master from the previous generation and passed in 1984, but still has, many of his students are very active in the world today. He has a book called "Be Your Own Therapist" or "Becoming Your Own Therapist," and from back from the 80s, and and that's so he acknowledged that long ago, before I think before cognitive therapy was even really around. But Yeah, but so I would say, so then you would just want to do it specifically for what's, figure out, be cautious about, what would really help with anxiety and what's the anxiety based on, right? So you would, you don't want to just maybe thinking about your own death isn't the solution if you have a lot of anxiety, because that could increase it, right?
But that's kind of where what I was thinking, not so much about the death part, but just that, you know, thinking back to even my work as a teacher, students were experiencing so many different things, and I thought we all do, and this, I would think, would be another way to get at sort of working through it
Yeah.
and understanding it.
Right. Right. I mean, the first thing is to identify, right? Emotional awareness is extremely important. Some of the aspects of Buddhist practice, they're sort of meant, it's funny because it's not really talked about that much in the teachings, but they're kind of geared towards like as a person with an extraordinary degree of emotional health at the outset. It's like these practices are actually really taught with the expectation or the assumption that someone trying them is like pretty much aware of their emotions, they have a lot of or already developed introspection, their mind is generally calm. They're not paranoid. They're not schizophrenic. They're like, they don't have mental illness. There's extreme anxiety or something, right? And so then they can work through these reflections, and then they would be effective. But I think actually, and it's not like it's not in the teachings. It's just not, it's the framework, the way of thinking of the way of using the language is very different. But what essentially we have the four foundations of mindfulness of the body, mindfulness of feelings, mindfulness of the mind, mindfulness of phenomena. So, of course, mindfulness of feelings and mindfulness of mind, those, when really practiced, will give you this emotional awareness, right? It's just using different language. But so that would be the first step, right? And there's lots of different exercises. I think school is the best place, to start learning those, because you have the setting, the structure, the time, well, I don't know, hopefully the time, hopefully they make time for children to learn emotional awareness. But then you could like do specific exercises and things with the whole class to help students, or journaling, or whatever it is. There's so many different ways that you can help students develop emotional awareness. Yeah, but that would be the first thing, and then try and identify, okay, where might it be coming from, and then try and see. I mean, I think for anxiety, a big thing that can help is, well, I mean, there's so many, but one, could be just developing more connection with others, right? That can help actually reduce anxiety, because it just helps you to see, it's kind of from a wider perspective. So different compassion-based practices can definitely be helpful for that, which would be approached through analytical meditation. Okay, any questions online? We're almost at 7:30 already, and we didn't realize how.
Listen, I do have a question for you. How are you? It's nice to be with all of you. When you're talking, so going on what you were talking about anxiety, we'll just use that as an example. So would the anxiety be the single point meditation, and all of your feelings and emotions surround that anxiety be the analytical part that you can meditate on? Or is the single point meditation just about breath?
The single pointed meditation and analytical meditation at our stage, they're not done in the exact same moment. So it's not like you would be meditating on an emotion single pointedly and also sort of analyzing things about it, because we just don't have that capacity. At some point we will, right? After like fully developing shamatha. So we have to sort of first choose, am I going to do single pointed or analytical on whatever topic? Now, as we talked about, last week, and again, just to do the screen share, it's mentioned in this part of, it's mentioned in other parts of the text too, honestly, but in this part it's just sort of described and again, this part of the text, as it said on top, and as Geshe-la emphasized, right, the Bhagavan stated. So what Tsongkhapa is doing is really just giving a description of these terms from sutras, just to help people maybe who've seen them and who are confused about them, be like, oh, okay, this is what universal objects are. This is what objects for purifying afflictions are, right? So it's doing that. But here we have the discursive and non-discursive images, which of objects of meditation, and those are those. The way he explains it, it really just means whether you're using analytical meditation or if you're using stabilizing meditation. But on what? Towards what? Focused on what? Anything. You could use analytical meditation on the breath, stabilizing meditation on the breath, analytical meditation on impermanence, stabilizing meditation on impermanence. Now, if you're saying, and then what about meditating on anxiety? Now that's a little different, right? When we say meditate on something, what does meditating on it mean? Does it mean you're just focusing on it? Like, what if you meditate on compassion? Are you just like, is it the same to meditate on the breath as it is to meditate on compassion? The meaning of meditate, is it the same there? Anyone?
It's a good question.
Does anyone have a guess?
No. Right.
No, they're not the same as your guess because?
Compassion is something that needs to be generated, whereas the breath is there present already.
Right. So compassion, not just that it needs to be generated, but the meaning of meditating on compassion is that your mind becomes compassion, right? You create compassion with your mind, right? When you meditate on the breath, you're not creating the breath, you're not turning your mind into the breath. You're just using mindfulness, metta awareness to concentrate on the breath. With compassion, you're actually transforming your mental consciousness into a compassion, an instance of compassionate mind, right? So there are different meanings of meditate on. So I'm just saying this because now when you said meditate on anxiety, we don't want to meditate on anxiety in the sense of meditating on compassion, like developing anxiety, but we want to analyze or understand the anxiety that's present. So that's why I would call that a mindfulness of mind practice, where you are aware of the anxiety happening in you, and then, as you said, you can try to analyze to see where is it coming from, what really is, what's presenting itself in my mind, what images, thoughts, what's the content of this anxiety, so you're just doing that kind of analysis, that investigation of yourself. Yeah. And then if you're doing single pointed meditation, I would say that would be more on an antidote to anxiety, right? So whatever you come to that's going to help you, or that does help you to counterbalance that anxiety, that would be what you want to focus on developing single pointedly.
Thank you.
Which could be your breath. Absolutely. Yeah. You're welcome. Okay, maybe anything else, or shall we go to dedication?
Yeah, when it comes to meditating on long-term subjects, it seems like there's some that are very well known and conducive, like meditating on impermanence or aspects of the precious human rebirth. But is the way to meditate on long rim, you actually would do analytical meditation and non-discursive meditation on every subheading, greatness of the author, kind of really study that and get that, and then greatness of the teaching and so on every kind of subject.
Yeah, Tsongkhapa, he mentions. So just go quickly to it. What does Tsongkhapa say about this question? Just go back to the page. Just go to the table of contents. Okay, so we're gonna go to the meditation session, page 93. Yeah, I mean, this is really like an encyclopedia of Dharma practice. This text really has kind of everything in it except for Tantra. It doesn't have much about Tantra in there. Okay. So I'm just going through because he's talking about the preliminaries, which are basically the 7 limb prayers, explaining them in a lot of detail here. I'm just going to talk about the actual meditation. Okay, actual session. Here we go. That which is known as meditation is the act of sustaining an object of meditation and specific subjective aspects by repeatedly focusing your mind upon a virtuous object of meditation. Okay, all right. Go forward because we don't have much time. What does he really say? What? Maybe it's actually in the earlier. Okay, he says it somewhere, but it wasn't here. I think it maybe was at the beginning of the relying on a teacher part. It could be. So essentially, though, he says that, right, basically from the section of relying on a teacher, those are all objects of analytical and stabilizing meditation, objects of meditation to sustain. And I forget where he says it. Anyway, and so the first one that you mentioned, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't do the screen share for that, but that's okay. The first one you mentioned of the greatness of teaching. So he doesn't include that. However, it's not like it's wrong to meditate on that as well, right? Again, remember I think the best way to think about what to meditate on is to think about the 3 types of wisdom or the 3 levels of learning, right? That from the external sources that receive knowledge, then that internalized knowledge, then that trained, deep wisdom knowledge. So I think if you think of meditation along those lines, and then also what is one of the greatnesses? What are they, the 4? Well, you see that all the Buddhist teachings are free of contradiction. You see all the Conqueror's teachings as instructions for personal practice, right? So, to meditate on that is, yeah, of course that makes sense. Yeah, it's a virtuous object. Yeah. I mean, when you meditate on that, what you're really doing is meditating on the qualities of the Dharma, right? The Dharma jewel. It's kind of meditating on refuge in a sense.
So this kind of the subject we're learning about now is interesting. It's like meditating on how to meditate.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. But then, really doing that, checking in on yourself, oh, is my experience anything like what Tsongkhapa talked about? Does it make sense to me? Does it not? Why not? That's really right. That's exactly right. You want to do that.
Debates just another way to meditate.
So it's essentially a type of analytical meditation. So it's that second level of learning. But still, you process a lot analytically and get a lot of, insight and depth from that. But then you still do need to kind of integrate that in a more single pointed fashion, so you still want to go and sit down and, take what came up in that debate and then really try and put it in your mind more clearly or more personally, maybe. So, yeah, it's definitely meditation. And I think it would be very helpful if it can become more prominent within, even like the kind of, what do you call it? This kind of Buddhist community. I mean, it doesn't have to only be used in a setting where you're doing it every day for several hours, right? It can still be very powerful to do in like a once a week, couple hours a week, setting.
You mean the debate, right?
Yes, I mean debate analytical. Yeah, it's I call it. I just thought of this term because someone told me that they don't like the word debate. It sounds too aggressive. So, but we can call it insight dialogue. you know. Yeah, it's a kind of insight dialogue because it's right insight. It's insight meditation and dialogue. Yeah,
And then it can become inside.
inside dialogue too. Yeah, that's right. It does. All right, let's do the closing prayers, which in this file. Okay, thank you, everybody. We have seems to be just the long rim dedication. That's it, but that's good enough. Let's see. We can, and then we can just chant the other ones if you know them. From my two collections, vast as space that I have amassed from working with effort at this practice for a great length of time, may I become the chief leading Buddha for all those whose mind's wisdom eye is blinded by ignorance. Even if I do not reach this state, may I be held in your loving compassion for all my lives, Manjushri. May I find the best of complete graded paths of the teachings, and may I please all the Buddhas by practicing. Using skillful means, drawn by the strong force of compassion, may I clear the darkness from the minds of all beings for the points of the path as I have discerned them. May I uphold Buddha's teachings for a very long time, with my heart going out with great compassion in whatever direction the most precious teachings have not yet spread, or once spread have declined. May I expose this treasure of happiness and aid. May the minds of those who wish for liberation be granted bounteous peace, and the Buddha's deeds be nourished for a long time, by even this graded course to enlightenment, completed due to the wondrous, virtuous conduct of the Buddhas and their sons. May all human and non-human beings who eliminate adversity and make things conducive for practicing the excellent paths never be parted in any of their lives from the purest path praised by the Buddhas. Whenever someone makes an effort to act in accordance with the tenfold Mahayana virtuous practices, may he always be assisted by the mighty ones, and may oceans of prosperity spread everywhere. Due to this merit, may we so attain the awakened state of Guru Buddha, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their suffering. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. In the snowy mountain pure land, you're the source of good and happiness. Powerful Tenzin Gyatso Genrezi, may you stay until samsara's end. I'll just say one final thing is that for any of this to make sense and to really feel anything valuable from this practice or these teachings, we do need to actually sit and try it, right? We need to really sit and try it. So take however much time you can, 5 minutes is okay, right? Or even sit with the text, because sometimes when you're sitting with the text and reading it, you just sort of naturally start to meditate. I mean, you don't have to, doesn't matter if you're in your, love seat or in your couch, or you don't have to be sitting cross-legged to reflect deeply. Okay. Thank you. Good night.